Hello everybody, I'm Sinister King and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at the units of Oriental empires. Now this is probably going to be a 2 or 3 part series. I'm going to try to cover as much as I can, but also keep the video short and sweet for you. I'm intending on covering the militia, the nobles, tribesmen, and possibly trained units if I can get that far in a timely manner. Please go ahead and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content and you want to see more, and give me a like if you learn anything today. That being said, I'm not an expert by any means, so just that's kind of my disclaimer. Hopefully you understand that I am just making these videos for fun and to hopefully help out at least one person, you know. And one last thing I want to note, I'll try not to make this sound too scripted. I have recorded it a couple times and it sounds a little scripted because I'm reading notes, so forgive me if this is less, I guess, spontaneous than my previous videos. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about militia. So militia units in Oriental empires are the backbone of the farming nations. Militia units are widely available in just about every village, town, city, etc. All that they require is to have a farm, or have farms, so you have a farming population. That being said, tribe units can, or tribesmen can get militia units later down the road once they start developing some towns with farming and research the required farming. They make good exploratory forces, and actually in this playthrough, which is just one I I just decided to load randomly, you can actually see I'm still have some out here exploring wider China. And I started here as the Han. And so early game, I create a lot of these units typically, and I start to send them out right away. And the reason for that is that they're cheap, I don't care about them, and I can disband them without even giving it a second thought, as they can be recruited anywhere in my city, or any of my cities. They also make a good quick reaction force if you suddenly get attacked, have bandits, that sort of thing. They don't do the best against bandits, but you know, they can just kind of slow down the enemy while you mobilize your forces. Especially like in this playthrough, I have a pretty large area. You can see I have lots of armies here moving north because these guys declared war and they are quite dangerous. So yeah, I'm gonna go attempt to subjugate them. Let's see. So first, let's talk about Peasant Light Spearmen. They're the most basic farmer unit, and they're the foundation for any of the farming nation's early military. They're cheap, weak, widely available, and all they require is farms. I think I mentioned that, but, you know, beat the dead horse. They have no penalty in difficult terrain, which is very useful, as a lot of the other farming nation units do have penalties in forests, hills, steep hills, that sort of thing. You can upgrade their defense and armor in the Imperial era. They make a good garrison force because they're cheap and they're mobile. And we'll go ahead and zoom in on these guys here so you can see them up close. They cough a lot, so I'm going to try to stay a little bit farther away. But you can see they're just basic spear units. I also like to use them early game as a deterrent. If you have lots of them, you start creating them right away. The AI, when they meet you, I'm sure you all have experienced this, the AI meets you, they declare war on you immediately. And basically they do a quick, in the first turn, they do a quick calculation, see how many units you have, they go, oh, this guy only has 1 unit, he must be weak. They declare war. It doesn't matter if you can recruit 50 units the next turn and defend yourself and crush them, the AI will do it. And if you just want to work on early expansion and development, go ahead and build as many of these units as you can in the early game, and it will go ahead and deter the AI from declaring war on you immediately. Yeah, and that's pretty much it for these guys. You can use them through the whole game. As you can see, I'm still using them as a garrison force, even though I have lots of trained units. Up next, let's go ahead and find some Peasant Archers. Here we go. Peasant Light Archers, all they require is a boyar to be constructed, and once you have that constructed in your settlement, they will become available for recruitment. I don't know what these guys are doing right now, to be honest. They're just unique. They must be going 2 different directions, and they're forming up for that. These are the Peasant Light Archers right here. Oop, sorry about that. Where did I go? I clicked off the screen there for a second. They're the most basic ranged unit in the farming roster. You'll need these ranged units to breach wooden walls and gates or to destroy towers. The breaching capabilities make them a must-have in the early game. If you don't have them, you're not going to be able to get through the enemy walls, and your battles are going to go poorly for you overall because of that. The war is not going to go your way if you can't take the settlements. And the AI will start building walls very early in the game. So will your friends if you play multiplayer. They also don't take penalties from terrain, which can give them an edge when facing enemy units. And yeah, they're very flexible and important for the farming empire. Don't avoid building them. I have in the past, and then it's always really annoying when you get to a settlement and you can't breach the walls. And so then you got to stand there and wait for, 15 turns while your archers that you create catch up slowly and all that. It's not fun. Additionally, some of your Imperial upgrades later in the game can make them a cheap and viable unit in your late game strategy. But yeah, they're important to have. I use them extensively. You can see a lot of them in my armies because you always want to have archers with you. Up next, I have Peasant Spearman on the list. Peasant Longspearman on the list. And I'm not actually sure that I have any created in this. But let's just go here. In here. Oh, okay, that's why. So it's later game, and I think they become not recruitable. I think they get replaced in later game. But I can talk about them still. So Peasant Longspearmen, once you research military drill, they'll become available to you as widely as the Peasant Light Spearmen are. The obvious difference is the length in spears. The longer spears allow the Longspearmen to have a 2x attack against Cavalry and Chariots, but that also causes them to suffer major combat penalties in forests, steep hills, and a moderate combat penalty in marshes. Basically, I use Longspearmen only if I'm in the plains. For example, as the Han, I did use them a decent amount because you can see the Han's starting area is all just flat plain. So it's pretty easy for me to choose my battles to be in the open here. That being said, I typically don't use them all that much because of their limitations. It is important to try to have a couple of them around just to help counter the cavalry charges, and you'll want to use them a little more when the AI starts creating lots of chariots and cavalry because they're obviously a direct counter for that. But yeah, I primarily do keep to the the light spearmen. And they're also very weak to skirmishing, so you want to charge them in. You don't want them formed up, getting shot at, taking their time getting into combat. You want to just put them straight in. Up next, we have the Peasant Dagger Axemen. Now, let's see if I can find some of those. It's quite possible that I should have gone through and found these units I was going to talk about before I started the video, but we're here now. Let's just keep going. Let's see if I can just look at their... Yeah, it doesn't even look like I have them recruitable just yet. I must not have weaponsmiths. So, I'll still talk about them. These early peasant units are the first proper melee units that the farming-based empires have. They become available after you construct the weaponsmith, as I just mentioned. So, I don't know. I could have swore I probably had some, but I haven't played this particular... Yeah, so you have a weaponsmith here, so they should be available, but they're not. Huh. Oh, I'm being dumb. These halberds replace them later. Okay. Anyway, brain fart moment. They become available once you construct the weaponsmith. They have a higher attack and armor piercing, making them superior to other militia units, such as the Peasant Light Spearman or Peasant Longspearman. They still retain the same terrain bonuses, or rather, they ignore terrain penalties, like we discussed earlier. And they will still be defeated by tribesmen. Keep that in mind. The tribesmen are significantly stronger because they have less options. And so the nomadic nations have a pretty good bonus early game. And the only real weakness to know is they don't have any anti-cavalry properties, which typically by the time you start getting lots of those peasant dagger axemen into your armies, the enemy is starting to create lots of chariots and or cavalry. So just keep that in mind. You don't want to be too heavy with the dagger axemen. Up next, we have Peasant Halberds, which I know I have a ton of. So let's go take a look at some Peasant Halberds. We can go armed with more. Yeah, here's a couple. You can kind of look as I'm clicking through at the different military makeups I have. I have pretty powerful military force at this time. Fairly capable. So these are the Peasant Halberds right here. They're a pretty cool looking unit. They've got those T-shaped halberds there. They can, historically use those to hook legs, necks, pull people off horses, that sort of thing. But let's go ahead and talk about them in relation to this game. Now, Peasant Halberds will replace your Dagger Axemen, as I mentioned earlier, because I had a brain fart, when you enter the Warring States era. The Peasant Halberds will perform comparably to their predecessors in open terrain. However, they gain a penalty when fighting in difficult terrain. The trade-off is definitely worth it for this era, though, because cavalry and chariots become more and more common. So you're gaining something that's more applicable. So in early game, right, you will need those units that get terrain bonuses or ignore terrain penalties, rather, because you're probably going to have a lot more forest, less farmland, and be exploring and fighting in those sudden battles while you're exploring. So that being said, now by this stage in the game, you're going to be facing a lot more horses, and so you want something with anti-cavalry perspectives or bonuses, but then you also will be fighting more on your own terms in your farmland, so you got to be strategic about when you pick your battles. That being said, halberds gain that bonus that I mentioned against mounted units, and they can win 1-to-1 against a light, heavy, or heavy chariot. Cavalry and 4-horse chariots will still defeat peasant halberds, so it's best to try to receive charges with those long spearmen in particular, or peasant light spearmen even. So just basically you want to have these in your army, but you also want to still try to have some spearmen around. I don't take that to heart too much, as you can tell by my lack of spearmen. Oh, here's some peasant dagger axemen and spearmen. This is probably a little bit older of an army. These ones that are lagging behind are a little newer. All right. Up next, we have the Peasant Chukanu. These units are a type of crossbow unit, and they require the crossbow maker to create, as well as the Chukanu research, which if we go to, oh my gosh, you can see how long it's been since I have looked at this at all. Military theory. I don't know that I have it researched yet. Oh, so it's going to be under knowledge. There it is. The Chukanu research is right here under knowledge. Good to know. They are able to fire 10 bullets before reloading, but they suffer multiple penalties, such as half the range of archers. They cannot breach palisade walls. Keep that in mind. I didn't know that my first time. I created a bunch of these guys, and it sucked because I could not breach palisade walls, and that's what I was using them for. I was using them to replace my archers. So, you can't breach walls, gates, or towers. They will defeat militia archers, tribal archers, trained archers, crossbows, and spear/crossbow units in a 1v1. So they're very good for garrisoning, and they're very good for skirmishing. Typically, I will use them in a garrison because, like I said, they're very good. They out-skirmish all those other units that I just talked about, and they will destroy units at the gate. That being said, I avoid them in my attacking armies because of their inability to breach walls. So those armies that I'm going to send out to conquer the enemy, I'm not going to have these guys in there too much, honestly. Maybe a couple of my groups. As you saw, I have multiple stacks of units heading north. So, you know, I might intersperse some in there for skirmishing capabilities, but for the most part, I will avoid sending them out to actual, like, field battles. This is a viable unit if you're also using artilleries in your forces, because the artillery will obviously break through walls, and I suppose by that point in the game you would probably be using a decent amount of artillery, so you know they are viable. Again, I like the easy flexibility of just having archers and using my cav to clean up enemy ranged units. They also lose a lot of their relevance as armor upgrades are implemented amongst the enemy. Okay, up next we have Peasant Heavy Spearmen, and I don't think that I have Peasant Heavy Spearmen available to me just yet. I have trained ones, but not Peasant. They think these become available in the... well, let's just keep it going through. So the Peasant Heavy Spearmen are hardy and inexpensive units that require a barracks, but they are available to... they're still a militia unit, so they're the only militia unit that requires a barracks. It may lead to you creating barracks in cities that you didn't necessarily plan on having barracks in. So for me, I like to have my trade cities, right, like this, where I have lots of trade buildings or civic buildings constructed. But then if I go over to my capital here, this is actually one of my military buildings, or settlements rather. So I'll build lots of military buildings here. Maybe I did that different this round. That being said, yeah, so like here, I definitely have lots of military buildings. So I'll do this. But if you want those heavy or those peasant heavy spearmen available in all of your territories, like I would like to have, I'll probably build a lot more barracks than I normally would and try to keep my income, you know, balanced still. And they're only available once you reach the Imperial era, and they still need farming population. So got that out of the way. They replace Peasant Longspearman and their excellent counters to cavalry with a 2 times attack and a 4 times defense. So they're very powerful against cavalry, which is really great when you get into the late game, the Imperial Age. And they'll be all over for you, just like the previous units were. So up next, I have a Tribesmen section, and I'm going to go ahead and try to get through these Tribesmen and the nobles and try to get this video wrapped up. So Tribesmen are the farmers. Oh, excuse me. The Tribesmen are the herders equivalent of the farming cultures. They are far from equal, though. If you're playing as the herders, it's possible for you to rule the map with your tribesmen in the early game, because you will just wipe the early farming peasants militia aside. I highly recommend that if you're going to play as a herding nation, then you go ahead and be very aggressive early game. If you sit back and let the farmers research and build units freely, then you're going to have a hard time later in the game. Take your horse archers on long raiding parties and assault early cities with your infantry. Basically, don't sit back, because you start with an advantage as a herding nation. You know, like the Mongolian nations up north. And if you sit back, the farmers will outpace you and become too strong for you. It'll be just difficult late game, I guess. So up first we have the Tribal Light Spearmen. Let's see if we can't find an army with... I know there's one around here somewhere. Oh, it's probably in the city. Yeah, this is their unit card here. But Tribal Light Spearmen are the superior equivalent to the Spear Militia, or Light Spear Militia for the farmers. They're strong enough to trade blows even with the farmer, or even with trained units. So the blue units that you saw that come significantly later game, I I think I have some around here. Yeah, so even these guys here, those tribal warriors will actually go toe-to-toe with these guys. So that's how strong they are, just as kind of a reference. They have the same terrain bonuses as the farmers' militia units. So in difficult terrain, they're very difficult to defeat because they are, like I said, strong, and they ignore terrain penalties. So if you take these trained spearmen, heavy spearmen here, and you put them out in some steep hills or forest, those tribesmen are probably going to eat them alive. Keep that in mind so you don't just throw your trained units away against these formidable tribal units. And they're capable of taking cities from militia units once the walls are breached without any issue. So, again, use them wisely if they're on your side, and pick your battles carefully if they're not. Up next, we have Tribal Light Archers, which are right here in the middle. Again, I'm sorry I don't have all these units just readily available. But, yeah, this will work, I think. So the Tribal Light Archers are basically as good as the farmers' professional soldiers, only they cost as much as the farming militia units. So they're essentially the best ranged bang for your buck, so to say, in the game, in my opinion. They can defeat militia units if they charge in. So in melee combat, they can defeat militia units, which is kind of crazy. And they can hold their own when charged. They suffer no terrain penalties. And they're, again, just one of the best go-to units in the game for their cost. I use them a lot when I'm playing as the herders. I really enjoy my games, just playing hyper-aggressive, trying to take over a large part of the map, and raiding and all that. So, speaking of raiding, up next we have Tribal Horse Archers. I did look around and I didn't see any earlier, so I'm not... Yeah. The AI doesn't have any around me. But we'll go ahead and just talk about them. The Tribal Horse Archers are nomadic horse archers that are the best of the 3 tribal units that we've been talking about. They are very effective at skirmishing with other ranged units despite having less troops per unit. They are highly mobile, moving 2 times as far as other tribesmen, and they can enter steep hills, making them highly maneuverable on the map. You can actually, if you're playing against friends, they might think that because they can't move their units through steep hills that they're safe there, and they might, try to bottleneck you here. Well, you can just send your horse archers right around and outpace them, go start raiding their farms, So if you were playing over here and your buddy's playing here, you might be able to give his military the slip, get out here and start just wrecking all of his farms and everything. It's a pretty fun way to play in multiplayer, as well as, as a... single player campaign such as this. When they're used to charge militia units, they will win in a 1v1 on flat terrain, and they're fantastic at harassing the enemy forces. I usually keep mine set to harass for the most part. And another thing to keep in mind is when you're playing as a Mongolian type faction up here in the north, you can send those horse archers pretty quickly down south. So if you have a stack of just horse archers, don't be afraid to go out and go raiding with them. It's a good source of income. And, you're going to be pretty far from the enemy, so they're not going to be able to come just invade you. They're, again, like I said, they're a personal favorite of mine, as they're essentially the best unit in the early game, and they're cheap to basically create. Their travel distance lets them strike out and raid empires like I was talking about that are far away. I remember on my Mongolian playthrough that I did, I was raiding all the way down into like the Han and Wu Empire. So that's how far I made it with just raiding basically. And I was raiding all over. I sent them. They pay for themselves if you send them out. And that pretty much sums up the 3 tribal units there. So up next we have nobles, and nobles are just a little bit better in the very early game. I think I'm kind of into the trained, and so all my nobles are going to show up as chariots now because of my gentlemen ride chariots edict. That being said, let's go ahead and talk about the noble Dagger Axemen. So... hold on a second. Let's go ahead and find... there was one. A unit of we'll just look at these peasant dagger axemen, I guess. Should be these guys here, and it kind of looks like they just have pickaxes, but these are the peasant dagger axemen we talked about earlier, and essentially there's a noble version of them in early game, as I'm sure you all know. They're the most basic starting noble unit. They're all around a decent unit. They do not take any real terrain penalties, and they're ideal for breaching settlements in the early game, as they can tank missile fire pretty respectably. Up next, there's noble archers. These nobles become available when you create your boyar. They have better armor and shooting capabilities that allow them to defeat, rather than the peasant archers, I should add in, I guess, allowing them to defeat militia archers and tribal archers in a duel. They can also adequately defend themselves from militia attacks in melee, so they're a pretty good unit. They're heavier than their peasant archer counterparts. I'm going to zoom out so their coughing and sniffing doesn't get anybody sick. Up next, we have noble chariots, which would be, I think, these guys right here. Noble chariots. So I, like many other people, have severely underestimated these units, especially when I first started playing. I was like, chariots, like, they got replaced for a reason, you know? But honestly, I didn't like them, but this way of thinking is kind of stupid and rigid. They will largely dominate in the early eras. They're more mobile, and they inflict heavy casualties on a successful charge, and they can harass infantry, charge ranged units, making them flexible on the battlefield. Basically, the only real downside is that you lose access to the previous noble units, so if you're using those extensively in heavily wooded areas, that type of thing, maybe you hold off on them. But if you're fighting on the fields, the flat fields or anything like that, they're a lot better than those previous noble units that we talked about, the dagger axemen and the archers. These guys wreck them pretty good. Let me just hover over here so you can see. Like, look at the statistics. I mean, they're pretty chonky boys there. Up next, we have the noble cavalry. So these units will be available from the Warring States era on, and they are farmer-only unit. They're excellent at fighting infantry if you can successfully keep them from encountering units that have anti-cavalry bonuses, such as the Longspearman, that sort of thing. They will rout most infantry units. They will defeat a range of opposing units 1v1, including chariots, light horse archers, and trained halberds. Up next, there's noble horse archers, which are going to be tribal units, or rather herdsmen. It's kind of confusing because a lot of these units are available to both factions, as long as you have a lot of the farmer units are available to the herders as well, as long as you have the correct buildings, and you have farming population. But noble horse archers are a tribal unit only. They're very strong, and a full-size unit can defeat the farmer's noble cavalry. So that gives you an idea of how strong they are in melee combat. They can basically beat out the the farmers, even in melee combat. So keep that in mind when you're playing as a farmer, that they are dangerous. And if you're playing as a herder, keep in mind how powerful they all are. Don't underestimate them. Use them. Noble armored horse archers. They're another herder exclusive noble unit. If you invest all the way up in the armor factory, they can have 4 more defense and armor than the noble horse archers, which is pretty good. So other than that, they're pretty comparable. And then you have the noble heavy cavalry. Again, they are herder only. They replace the noble armored archers. They get multiple bonuses or multipliers versus cavalry and chariots and infantry, as well as a better stat line. The last level of armory provides a huge bonus for them, and the ability to recruit this kind of cavalry for free from any city without stables is pretty awesome. So basically, any city you can recruit these in. In open field, they will defeat just about anything that you throw at them. So I use the noble heavy cavalry a lot when I was playing as the Mongols in my later waves. So I kind of sent waves. I sent horse archers down, start raiding. Then I sent down some infantry, took over a couple cities, and then lots of armies with loads of heavy cavalry, that type of thing. But that just about wraps up what I wanted to get covered today. It's been 30 minutes, so if you've stayed this long in the video, again, please subscribe if you like this type of video, and if you enjoyed it, got anything out of it, give it a like. Let me know you want me to make part 2. And yeah, thank you guys so much. Just to recap, we covered the militia units, the tribesmen, and the nobles for both herders and farmers. So that will probably be somewhere in the description and or title. But until next time, keep playing, keep leaving comments, and thank you for your support.